Dr. David walked through the dimly lit corridors of St. Luke's Hospital, his footsteps echoing against the cold tiles. The hospital was eerily silent tonight, the usual hum of machines and soft chatter replaced by an unsettling quiet. It was nearly midnight, and most of the staff had already settled into their routines, the night shift taking over as the day's chaos finally wound down. But Dr. David had one last task before he could go home. He prided himself on being thorough, ensuring that every patient was seen, every chart updated. As he finished his rounds, a call came through on his pager. "Doctor, there's a patient in room 13. Can you attend to them?" "The nurses are all tied up," the receptionist's voice crackled through the line. "Room 13. Dr. David frowned, pausing mid-step. That room had been closed for years, ever since the incident, the one that no one talked about. But this was a hospital, after all. Patients were moved around all the time. Perhaps someone had reopened it without his knowledge. Determined to shake off the growing unease, Dr. David made his way down the long hallway. As he approached the door to room 13, he noticed it was slightly ajar, a sliver of light spilling into the dark corridor. A chill crept up his spine, but he pushed the feeling aside and entered the room. It was colder inside, the kind of cold that seeped into your bones. The air was thick with the smell of antiseptic, and something else, something foul that he couldn't quite place. A single lamp cast a dim glow over the bed, where a figure lay motionless, covered in a thin white sheet. "Good evening," Dr. David said, his voice unnaturally loud in the stillness. "I'm Dr. David. How are you feeling?" The patient didn't respond. Dr. David stepped closer, noticing how pale the figure seemed, the skin almost translucent under the harsh light. He reached out to pull back the sheet and check the patient's. As soon as his fingers touched the fabric, the lights flickered. For a brief, terrifying moment, the room was plunged into darkness. And in that darkness, he heard it, a whisper, soft and close, like breath on his neck. "Why did you leave me?" The lights snapped back on. Dr. David's heart pounded in his chest as he looked down at the bed. It was empty. The sheet lay crumpled as if no one had ever been there. Panic surged through him. He backed away, his eyes darting around the room. The walls seemed to close in, the shadows growing longer, darker. He turned and bolted from the room, the door slamming shut behind him with a deafening bang that echoed down the corridor. He ran to the nurse's station, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "Who was the patient in room 13, he demanded, his voice trembling. The nurse on duty looked up at him, confusion written on her face. "Doctor, room 13 has been closed for years. No one's been in there since," she trailed off, her eyes widening with realization. Dr. David felt a cold dread settle over him, the memory surfacing like a long-buried nightmare. Years ago, he had treated a patient in that very room, a patient who had died under his care, a death he had never fully come to terms with. Her last words had been a whisper, barely audible as she drew her final breath. "Why did you leave me?" The truth hit him like a punch to the gut. He hadn't just seen a ghost, he had seen her, the patient he had failed, the one he had tried so hard to forget. She had come back, not just as a memory, but as a presence, haunting the room where she had died, waiting for the doctor who had abandoned her. From that night on, Dr. David refused to stay in the hospital after dark. He couldn't bear to walk those halls, to risk hearing that whisper again. And room 13 was sealed once more, its door locked tight, though rumors persisted. Some claimed that if you stood outside it late at night, you could hear a faint voice, a whisper in the silence, asking why she had been left alone.